finally time for another proper book review. This is one that, excuse me, I've been reading the physical book and then listening to this as I've been running errands and whatnot, and just finished it yesterday morning. And this is The Road Out of Hell, Sanford Clark and the True Story of the Wineville Murders by Anthony Flacco with Jerry Clark. And Jerry Clark was the son, or is the son, of Sanford Clark. So we'll get into that here in a second. This was published in 2009. And first, this deserves, if you're familiar with the Wineville murders, then this isn't going to need much introduction. But this is a kind of an obscure serial killer case that I think probably dovetails with a lot of the other stuff that a lot of you look into. So I figured this one, and I'll get into that as I go along here, but the Wineville case came to my attention, as some of you probably too, in the Clint Eastwood movie, The Changeling, that came out, I think, in 2007, 2008. And in that movie, it kind of ends with a quick overview of the Wineville murders and just kind of, okay, yeah, case closed. And the whole thing there that was starring Angelina Jolie, and the whole premise of the movie is her son is abducted while going out to run an errand for her, and she goes on this hunt to find her child because obviously her kid's missing, and it's a big deal to her. And the LAPD provide her with a child, say, oh, this is your kid. Now, it'd be one thing if it was an infant, but this is a little boy that's probably 9 or 10 years old. And she knows this is not her kid. And the kid was Walter Collins. And the little boy, and I think through medical records, like really obvious medical records, like whether or not he was circumcised and things like that, it became painfully obvious that this was not her child and that this little boy was pretending to be her child. And she finally made enough of a stink that the LAPD took the child back. The kid admitted that he had played a part in this hoax to pretend to be Walter Collins, so to satisfy this mother that she had her son back. But of course, that still left the problem of where's Walter Collins? And turns out Walter Collins had been murdered on this chicken ranch in Wineville, California. Now, Wineville, California, if my geography is correct, is kind of a little farther east than, say, like Riverside, or in the vicinity of modern Riverside, California. And it was such a scandal, the murders were such a scandal at the time, that Wineville changed its name, and has since, I think that the whole area of Wineville has been absorbed into a few different areas. So Wineville is no more, but is in, again, it's important to know where this is in relation to Los Angeles, because the whole story is about, so anyway, that I say that because the Clint Eastwood movie really made, if you've seen that, I'd be curious your thoughts on this. The Clint Eastwood movie was a real head scratcher because the story of Walter Collins is tragic and terrible, and the police tried to substitute that out, another child out, is insane. But the part that really got me watching the movie, because at the time I was into a lot of other things, but I hadn't necessarily gone down that particular rabbit hole of a lot of the serial murder and a lot of the Dave McGowan type stuff. So when I started looking, when I saw that movie, I thought there's got to be more to this, because this is messed up. And the cops don't typically do that, they don't typically go, oh, you got a missing kid, here's a kid right here, we'll just pair you up with this missing kid, this other kid that could be your kid. I mean, that's a really odd, usually, no offense to law enforcement, but typically when there's a missing persons case, you're on your own. There's very there are efforts made to search for the child, but that's a really odd reaction, is my point, that to grab another child and say, here's your kid. So that really sparked my interest in it, of why would the LAPD do this? And of course, this all took place in the 20s, in the late 20s. I think from 27 to 29, somewhere in that time period. So it turns out that the murders were being committed by a sadist pedophile by the name of, oh goodness, I'm not going to get this guy's name right if I don't look it up. Stuart Northcott. He has one of those three. He has the classic first, middle, last name that. Stuart Northcott. For the sake of this, I'll keep it to Stuart Northcott. But Gordon Stuart Northcott. Sorry for the aside there, but Gordon Stuart Northcott was the serial killer. And this book tells the story of how his nephew, this boy pictured here, was given to Gordon Stuart Northcott by his sister, this boy's mom, and taken from Canada and moved down to Southern California. And the interesting thing about Gordon Stuart Northcott that many of you will find interesting is this is one of those books that's a great book, don't get me wrong, but you get the idea that for the sake of brevity or whatever, some of the things have been kind of left on the cutting room floor. But one of his victims, an accomplice, forced accomplice, Sanford Clark, mentions that Gordon Stewart would go into LA periodically and hang out at the film studios, and had even been a pianist for early silent films. So there's an odd Hollywood connection there, which I think many of you will find interesting. But the case is messed up beyond belief, because this little boy is given by his very messed up mom to his sadistic uncle, and then forced to participate in these murders of little boys. And what the uncle does is goes into LA and abducts little boys and takes them to this chicken ranch and proceeds to molest them and use them until he's gotten all he can out of them, and then he kills them and then buries them on the farm or elsewhere in the desert. So, and he does this repeatedly. So Sanford's account of this puts the body count that he was aware of probably around 20 murders or more total that he was aware of. The thing that I think this book is most valuable for this audience, I mean, it's a tragic tale, and to see that this boy, Sanford Clark, pulled out of this and actually lived a productive life. And a lot of the book, that's really the point of this particular book, is about how he was able to then become a productive member of society, having endured sadistic torture for about 2 years at the hands of his sadistic uncle. The thing that I think you all that's really valuable to this audience, is even if you just read the first third of this book, and it is dark, messed up reading, like the things that this little boy endured are horrible beyond description. And you get the idea that the author really tried to be as careful with that and as respectful as possible, and still convey the trauma that Sanford endured. But the best thing, most beneficial to this audience, is really understanding sadism. And I think I was just talking to some of our friends last night. We were discussing this case, and I really think sadism as a behavioral phenomenon is one of those things that is overlooked a lot, because it is evidence of real objective evil. There's no way you can look at a sadist behavior and say this is just a chemical imbalance, that this is just somebody that if they had the right adjustment to their brain chemistry, that suddenly they'd get better. These are people who delight in creating suffering in others. And I marked something in here, and where he's basically training this Sanford boy how to be a criminal, how to basically pretend like everything's fine when it's not, how to act when he's questioned about some of the criminal behavior. And one of the more disturbing moments in the book is where Gordon Stewart Northcott's mom, so this little boy's grandmother, if you follow all that, shows up to check on the farm and see how everything's going, this chicken ranch. And they're using one of the chicken coops has been repurposed to basically be, or purpose built to be like a prison cell for these boys that he holds have his way with. And his mom shows up to check on all this situation, and she finds Walter Collins in one of these in this chicken coop, and she comes in the house all pissed off that this little boy is there. And she had evidently talked to this little boy because she knows she's got some firsthand knowledge now, having spoken to this little abducted boy. And you think that maybe the mom is going to be a voice of reason in this, but just the opposite. She winds up saying that they have to kill him now, and she gets an axe, and they all take turns striking his head with an axe so that they're all guilty of murder. And this is the mom's idea. So, and after that, that's when this Sanford Clark realizes that there is a generational component to this, that this isn't just the uncle that's a sadist, that this is the whole family has been given over to this kind of sadism. So there's a lot of, just to read from that perspective and see the account from this child's perspective and how he endured this and what it does to his head, the way he becomes compromised in his own mind so that he feels like he is genuinely guilty of these crimes, even though he has been forced to do them. I think that's a valuable read because this is probably one of the best explanations of that sort of situation to help you understand these other cases out there and understand how some of these victims find themselves in these extreme conditions where they dissociate. And he explains that really well without really getting into calling it dissociative states or anything like that. He also mentions that his uncle would go into this basically like a dissociative state himself when he would suddenly want to molest him or these other little boys, that he would get this look about him. And he describes him even giving off this specific smell that he started to recognize as being a precursor to some of his episodes. And I thought that was really interesting too. So lots of interesting stuff in here to check out. And then here's the part that I wanted to read to you all. This is a very interesting, as he's driving Sanford to his farm at the beginning of all this, he's talking about Hollywood and kind of his inside scoop on Hollywood. Now, whether or not this is or not, the dude is a pathological liar. So this is the tough thing about these kinds of accounts, is sifting through how much to pull from it. But this is this is a very profound insight into this guy's mindset. So they're driving down the road, and he's explaining to this little boy kind of his thoughts on, kind of his social commentary. And he's talking about the inferior people of the world and how they're a burden. And it's also interesting. Eugenics are brought up several times in this book as as this new thing that people are talking about. So he's talking about how do people get rid of these undesirables. And he says, how? Somebody needs to just stick it out his chest and get the job done. That's how he steered the car to avoid a dead skunk. Whoops, that smell will get on your tires. It's there for miles. Anyway, Hollywood is pitching in with this, helping us get rid of the rejects. And you have to admit, it's brilliant, really. Do you know how they do it? Say no. And then he says no. And that's the thing. He trains him how to react. I mean, down to facial expressions, how to react to his dialogue with him. I'll tell you, they do it by making ugly people sorry to be alive. Ha! And they accomplish that by showing the ugly people everything that they're missing out on, just by being fat and twisted up looking and generally inferior. And so, when the ugly people see that, it depresses their spirits, naturally. And get this, it's brilliant. That inhibits their urge to breed. American movies are going to make the whole world 10 times smarter. Ingenious, no? And then the little boy says, I guess. No, you don't guess. When you're dealing with a sure thing, there is no guess involved. So anyway, there's a few of his times where he's making these rambling commentaries about these rejects. So it is very interesting that the kids, the bulk of the kids that he preys upon are children of migrant workers, and that he takes and molests and then murders. You have to wonder, if you're of this ilk watching this channel, when you read this, you have to wonder, given his associations with Hollywood and his frequent trips to and from LA, because he hardly did any work on this chicken farm. He left all that to his nephew, who did not go to school, did not attend school, or didn't do anything other than stay on this farm and maintain this ranch for about 2 years straight, while his uncle was going in and abducting little boys and whatnot. So you have to wonder if there was other things afoot that maybe the nephew wasn't privy to. And even though there's no mention of the occult, there's a lot of certain ritualistic aspects of this that you can't, if you've read other survivor accounts, you can't help but not see, like locking him, like doing kind of burial alive to this little boy to punish him, and then letting him out and forcing him into these dissociative states. So really interesting book. And I'm going to also review Project Artichoke, which I think is I've just started rereading it. I originally read it about 7 or 8 years ago, but I think it's a great companion piece to this, in that it describes similar circumstances around the same area, same geographic region, although a little farther north, but very similar circumstances to this. So I will review that one and hopefully link it at the end of this review. So overall, dark reading, but ultimately I don't want to say uplifting, but it does end in a somewhat positive way, to know that this guy, his whole life's trajectory ended without him repeating any of his uncle's behavior. And that was of utmost concern to him as a human, having witnessed this, having been forced to participate in some of this, and to make it out alive, and then to be able to go through the surplus of his life without falling prey to some of those behaviors, is a miracle of sorts. So excellent book. I recommend this, but I also recommend, this is very, I hate, the word trigger is so overused now, but there is some stuff in here that is, even though, again, it's presented as tastefully and carefully and respectfully as possible, is still really difficult to listen to. If you've been through anything like this, be very careful as you approach it, because some of this is really messed up. But again, I think really valuable to those of us who like to turn our backs on this and avoid it. This is the kind of material that really helps you understand things from a victim's perspective. And I think that is incredibly valuable to unraveling all the other things, because it's real easy outside looking in to some of the victims of mind control and SRA and all that sort of thing to go, well, why didn't they do X, Y, and Z? Why didn't they just do X? And he does a fantastic job of really communicating the mental state of someone in that situation. And you can really sympathize. My hat's off to the author for really doing a good job of communicating that to you, the reader, of what that's like. So I think there's maybe at least 1 or 2 other books on this subject that he mentions at the end that I think I may go run down now. Because again, the whole focus of this book is more about the nephew and how he came out of this situation and then made a life for himself. But excuse me, you can't help but read this and go, there's a lot more to this. And he even says as much in there, that really he tried to supply you with as much material to really understand this little boy's situation without being grotesque and without really dwelling on a lot of the worst aspects of it. So anyway, excellent book. Cannot recommend this enough, but again, with that warning, understand what you're walking into, that and understand that there are children in these situations as we speak. So again, excellent book, The Road Out of Hell, Sanford Clark and the True Story of the Wineville Murders, or the Chicken Coop Murders as they're sometimes referred, and by Anthony Flacco with Jerry Clark. And Jerry Clark was the son of Sanford Clark, who helps relay that. So a lot of this was assembled through old court records, what he told his son about this, and also what he compiled from other relatives, surviving relatives. So excellent, if not very dark read.